Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 of the accessibility series. We're more than halfway through. So this lecture is going to cover understandability. So the distinction between understandability and operability is a little bit murky, so let me try to add some clarity there. Operability is making it technically possible to do everything, no matter the input device or method or whatever device you use. Understandability, however, is about making all content understandable. So information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable, i.e. the content or operation cannot be beyond their understanding. Some content on the WCAG site has items in different sections. I've done a bit of reordering for clarity and really just to be able to teach the content in a fairly flowy way. So one part of understandability is that the language is defined. It makes a big difference to screen readers and voice assistants. So you want to set the language on the HTML, and if for whatever reason the language changes in some particular section, you can set the same language tag on the element within. It's just really important that the top level element, the HTML tag, has a language equals whatever it is. That's going to be really important for the metadata to be passed correctly. That's going to be really important for screen readers because they typically mention the title. So it sounds like a small thing. It's just going to make a big difference, and it's going to be something that might be something that comes up in your assessment criteria. Another part of understandability is that things are predictable. This one is also really easy to satisfy. A big theme of this section is just to not do inaccessible things. So to keep things predictable, don't cause page changes or form submissions on focus or input. Also, to aid accessibility tools, keep IDs consistent, and unless the content changes, don't change the underlying HTML. So yeah, really just don't mess around with things. Specifically the stuff around form submissions on focus or input, just to clarify, if it is a search bar and it's got all the right markup and everything, and the form submission is asynchronous and it's an AJAX request where it shows either autocomplete stuff below it, or it's just like it does the Google style thing where it starts submitting, that's fine as long as the markup is all there. Generally, yeah, if the markup is there and things are as users expect, you're going to be fine here. It's just really don't do anything too crazy. To aid low bandwidth users, content should also make as much sense as possible without CSS. So this one just means don't use CSS to convey meaningful information or to reorder content. You can position elements with CSS, just don't use it to create weird positioned reordered content. I think this one is also going to be one where you have to kind of try to fail this criteria. All right, so last lecture we covered how to navigate within a page. It's also important to navigate within a site. So we need to know where we are and where links go. And it's important here to be succinct and to create unique titles for every page. This also helps for search engines and as site crawlers and screen readers do very similar things. So here we have a title. We start with the uniqueness of the page. So I'm not going to start with accessibility in this mock site. I'm going to start with understandable because that's specifically what's mentioned here. But you need to include the site. You just don't want to include it first. So titles should probably be no longer than 60 characters. And here I have a description. We have a meta tag with a name equals description and the content equals that. And the description should be a short paragraph. 1 or 2 sentences should suffice. A good heuristic here is to think about what would look good and get across the point before truncation on a search item. That generally what shows up on like Google search results or Bing search results That's generally how much content a voice assistant user would want to hear in one go. Anything more than that, then it gets particularly verbose and particularly hard to use. So as a follow-up to that previous part is the link purpose. So for links, a level A requirement is that it should be understandable in the context of the sentence, and a AAA requirement is that it's understandable with a link text alone. So the link text alone, the level AAA requirement is not going to be something that's assessed in this course, but I just wanted to show you because it's fairly easy to fill this criteria. So the first one, the link is separate completely from the paragraph tag, and there's just nothing there that really conveys the relationship between this thing. So this won't pass a level A requirement. In the second one, it will pass level A. It doesn't pass AAA. I accept the terms of service here. This will work, and this is going to be what you have to do in some cases without reordering the words. To pass all levels is actually pretty easy. I just want to show this here. Here is an example where I accept the terms of service, and the terms of service is the link. I think this is really clear with the link text alone where it goes. The link text should say where it goes. It doesn't need to say click here to see the terms of service. Saying the location is gonna work here. Also, don't forget any interactive item that sends you to a location, whether internal or external, should use a link tag. So if it sends you to a different page within the site or it sends you to a different site, you should use a link tag. That's going to be really important. And rather than create a button with an on-click thing that sends you away, you should use a link tag. There are some exceptions, of course, like if you're creating a form element, the submit will take you often to a different page. Specifically here, we're referring to things that should be links. So let's make forms understandable. Last lecture, we went through how to make forms operable. This is going to follow up with that. We addressed the mechanics. Now we need to address the usability of it. How can you label an input? So this is the most ideal way to label an input. It has the most support. But there are going to be a bunch of others that are also quite well supported. Here we have an input with an ID. We have a label with a for attribute. In React, it might be HTML4. Either way, it'll show up in your IDE. So it's a way to associate the label with the input. They should be adjacent to each other visually, and they should be just visually look like they're related. This one is also acceptable. It does, however, have some issues, particularly with custom component inputs. Say if the custom input has text, say you're implementing a custom select dropdown, that text is going to be treated as a label. So it's not ideal. Just something to be careful of. This one has caveats, but it is acceptable. So placeholders should not be used in this way. Placeholder text has pretty bad usability with screen readers. Even if you use a label as well, the placeholder should be an example rather than another label, because how the screen reader is going to say it is it's going to say an import, comma, name for the label, and then comma, name for the placeholder. So it's not going to give you the best UI. The best UX. So don't use the placeholder as the same name. But generally, there's no need to use a placeholder anyway. It's not something that's going to be hugely that useful. So sometimes it's useful to do the inverse of the first way. So rather than have an input with an input with an ID with a label that points to it, instead we have a label with an ID and the input points to it with aria labeled by. This is most useful if there are two or more elements that should have the same label as long as they are related, connected, and adjacent. An example of this might be you have a bunch of radio buttons, and then you have an other option where the user can write something down. Here, you have two labels. Two inputs, and they should have the same label. If you have an input with an invisible label, this is pretty common with search bars. Use ARIA label. So here is a really good example where you'd want to just use an invisible label. This doesn't show up in the markup. What you can do is you use a label in the same way we did before, and then make the label invisible using the way we did with skip links. But typically, it's perfectly fine to use ARIA label. It's pretty well supported. As a supplemental addition, you can also add a description to the input. This should not replace the label, and it also shouldn't be too long. This is useful for when there is more context that would be relevant to the user. Say if the field needs to be in a particular format and the HTML doesn't really have any standardized way to do that. This is also where you should add any custom error alerts on forms. So if you have an error alert, say there was something weird with the form, say the password was invalid or something like that, you'd want to attach an error alert on the form and attach it to the password field. I'll elaborate a little bit more about how you can create good alerting in an accessible way. But here is a really good example. Here we have "Are you described by?" Please use your full name, as this will be printed on the invitation. I've added role equals alert. It doesn't need to be if it's just a description that shows up before. You can add role equals alert in the same way I went through roles last time for search bars. You can alert to the user. This would be specifically relevant to error messaging. Additional attributes. Say you may be familiar with required and type. These will definitely help with accessibility, as the error can be identified immediately rather than odd submit. That's going to be really important as well. There's a big emphasis on being able to track and identify errors early. You should also use ARIA invalid to indicate if an input field needs amendment. This will be specifically useful for HTML error validation for custom error validation, as HTML will validate according to the specified type by default. This should be true only after on blur, not by default. And where possible, it's better to just fix the format than to throw an error. This is both a UX thing and also just an accessibility thing. Trying to deal with an error on a submit form is not a pleasant experience for accessibility, no matter how well put together it is. So here we'll go through some examples. Here, you don't need to put ARIA invalid for empty attributes or negative numbers if you define that through HTML attributes. Same thing with the minimum length. But it's really useful for anything custom. So here, bookings are only accepted on weekdays. Here we have an ARIA description, ARIA described by, and that links that really well. I think this is a really elegant way to throw an error, show that it's invalid, describe it. I think this is done really well, and you can't really capture anything like this with HTML, with default HTML attributes. So I've touched a lot about error messaging. I just want to explain a little bit more about the understandability here. So error messages should be succinct and specific. Saying start date is invalid isn't as helpful as saying start date must be on a Monday. It should be short, as long messages are annoying and fairly hard to follow to screen reader users. If the message is really long, if you can't see the message, you can't reread it. That actually is quite a lot of mental load and cognitive load to follow what's happening. Technically, they should have a role equals alert to signify its importance, and it is common to focus on the first invalid element. Adding the alert role interrupts the screen reader. to alert the user of the error. So I mentioned using the alert role for error messaging. There's a few others I'd like to introduce. So the alert role is really nice for error messaging, but it's also quite an aggressive, highly specific use case. You would not want to use it for everything. If you're uploading or downloading a file, you can use progress bar. This is for uploading or downloading a file, and it's got to be an important one, not just downloading JS assets or anything. What it will do is it will announce like the increments, and screen reader users can toggle this so that they only need to know when it starts and when it ends, or if it's been stuck for a particular while. Progress bar is going to be really useful here. Another one is for status. You can use this for global statuses, say any updates to your shopping cart. Say when you purchase an item or when you add an item to cart, you can throw a status, which is a really nice experience, I think. Visually, it shows a +1, but you don't need to. But that's going to be hard for people who are using a screen reader or a voice assistant to follow what's going on. You can use log for chat messages as they appear. That one's also really nice as well for that particular use case. And you can use timer. Use this for countdowns or stopwatch readouts. So this is quite similar to the progress bar, where screen reader users can change how often it's being read. You can make that work really well. By default, if the text gets updated, it'll only announce the change. So it looks at what the sentence used to be and what the sentence is, and it'll only say the words extra. So if you want the whole text to be re-announced, which is probably most useful for timers, use aria atomic equals true. So here, role equals status. Another example is if you're writing a mail server or mail client, and you need a way to be able to send incoming messages. So this is a what's called a polite announcement, where it won't interrupt what they're doing, but after it's finished reading out whatever screen reader message there is, then it'll say role equals status, or it'll say new email from Ahri. If you need to make an announcement and none of the roles fit, use Aria Live. So I kind of went through this a little bit. I touched on it a little bit. Aria Live can be added to most elements, and it is either polite or assertive. Though if you're trying to use assertive, you probably want the alert role. You almost always want to use polite here. And yeah, the Aria Live can be inferred from the role. So you want to use Aria Live and announcing roles, the roles that I mentioned before, very sparingly, as they are quite intentionally a disruptive experience. But of course, there are really good reasons to use this, and you do want to notify users of something. If you're, say, on a online auction site, you want to announce pretty clearly that an item that they were trying to buy has already been bought, or the timer is almost up. The one caveat here that is a little weird, and it's not a great browser experience, is there is a little browser quirk where adding both Aria Live and an announcing role leads to the same message being announced twice. So in this case, you would prefer to only use the role instead. But yeah, it's just a little weird where if it has both, it'll only it'll just do something weird where it announces both, and it's just not a great experience because they'll try to override each other. It's just not a great experience. So here we're at Aria Live because polite. One could make the argument that this is a status, but I just wanted to show you an example. This site will undergo routine maintenance in 30 minutes. Please save your data. So here, you're just trying to show a quick message. It's not too long, but it just really clarifies what's going on here. That's going to be really useful for messages that are quite obvious to visual users because it shows up and it's quite a broad color. you want to provide the same experience for screen reader users. And that wraps up understandability. We have one small lecture on robustness and just wrapping up accessibility. See you next time.